Thanks, Kate. Yeah, it's nice to be with you guys here tonight. I wasn't aware that this was being taped or broadcast, but that's a good thing. Back in 1994, when we took this picture on San Miguel Island, nobody really knew what an island fox was. We've come a long way since then. At that point, Kathy Schwim, who is in the audience tonight, was our wildlife biologist. We were out there in 1994. This was the high water mark of island fox population in recent time. We estimated we had about 450 animals on the island at that time. If you're somewhat aware of the island fox story, you know that we took a big dive in the island fox population on the northern Channel Islands since that time. But it's starting to go the right way, and we're going to talk about this tonight. It's a very positive story, but it's notable for several reasons, one of which is we almost lost 3 subspecies of island foxes. We came perilously close to extinction, as a matter of fact. In 1999, we had 15 foxes left on San Miguel and 15 foxes left on Santa Rosa as well. And so since that time, a lot of work by a lot of people has gone into this program, and we'll talk about that tonight and where we are. The other thing that's notable about island foxes is that their fate is tied to that of the entire ecosystem at Channel Islands. And this was not immediately apparent. And in fact, this is pretty much a recent discovery, but a lot of you folks probably know that too, that the fate of island foxes is tied into that of golden eagles, the predator that made an appearance in the 1990s and was able to sustain itself on the Channel Islands because of alien species like feral pigs and the absence of the bald eagle. Right now, island foxes on all 3 northern islands, as well as the southern island on which they're endangered, which is Catalina Island, are recovering. We have small recovering wild populations, and that's a far cry from what it was in 1999. We estimate that on San Miguel right now we have about 100 animals in the wild, and we haven't had that many animals since 1996, over 10 years ago. So it's a very positive story at this point. And this is due to kind of an unprecedented, very voluntary recovery effort by many agencies and entities, all of which came together because they cared about island foxes long before island foxes were ever declared endangered by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So in that respect, it's pretty remarkable as well. And the other thing that impresses me about this is that the importance of monitoring. Monitoring is what initially told us that we had a problem here with island foxes, and monitoring, which we will commit to doing forever and ever at this point of island foxes because they will remain vulnerable. Monitoring is going to see us through this. It's going to tell us when we're recovered, and it's going to ensure that island foxes remain extant on the northern Channel Islands. A little bit of basic fox biology. I'm sure a lot of you know this. Island foxes are what we call, they're the most geographically restricted of any canid species in the world. They only exist on the Channel Islands. They only exist on the 6 largest of the Channel Islands, so they don't exist on Santa Barbara or Anacapa. They've only been out there as their own species for maybe 16 to 18,000 years, which is just a drop in the bucket in terms of evolutionary time. They're descended from the mainland gray fox, which they look very much like. They're about a 1/3 smaller than that. And it's thought that they, perhaps a gray fox rafted out to the islands maybe 18,000 years ago. At that time, these 3 islands were coalesced into one because sea levels were different, and the mainland was a little bit closer. And so it would not have taken that much for a big El Nino storm coming down either the Santa Clara or the Ventura River to push a bunch of debris with maybe a pregnant island or a gray fox out to the islands. And since that time, they very rapidly evolved differences from the mainland gray fox, so much so that they're their own species. And also, the 6 different subspecies are different physically enough and genetically enough that everyone recognizes them as distinct subspecies by now. And it's thought that they very rapidly split into 3 subspecies when these islands became separated. But the way they got to the southern Channel Islands is a little less apparent, and it's assumed now that the Chumash Indians took them with them in their tamals when they made inter-island crossings. And that was really recent. They may have arrived down here at the southern islands within 3,000 or 5,000 years ago, which is, and again, a very rapid evolution took place into 3 different subspecies at that time. They're one of the smallest canid species worldwide. They weigh 4 to 5 pounds, which is less than your average house cat. They forage in all habitats on the islands. They take pretty much everything that's out there in season. So when there's berries or fruits during the summertime, they'll take that. They love insects when they're in season, when we get a flush of insects. They love deer mice as well. Deer mice are great small packages of fat and protein. And this fox here has there's about 4 tails coming out of that mouth right there. They're very important in the early summer when pups are still in the den and the parents can take these packages of fat and protein back to their pups and feed them. They also take anything else out there that's a vertebrate. This is one at Scorpion and at Santa Cruz Island, taking one of the native snakes out there. They exist as mated pairs, males and females, mate pretty much for life. Lifespan is 8 to 10 years. They'll defend very discrete territories, and they're thought to be mostly monogamous, which means that about a quarter of the pups that are born out there, according to the research, are the products of what you might call extramarital affairs. We call them extra-pair fertilizations. So there's some fooling, which is not a judgment. It's just there's some fooling around at territory boundaries that actually accounts for some of the pups that are born out there. Pups are born in mid-April after a gestation period of maybe 53 days. And they first appear coming out of the den maybe late May, early June. They'll spend their first summer learning how to hunt from their parents, accompanying them on foraging trips. And then by the time of their first fall, those pups weigh as much as adult island foxes do and can move off to, can disperse from their birth territories, from their natal territories, and go off and try and establish their own territories. Sometimes they stick around, but they can breed in their less than or about 1 year of age as well. In 1994, things were going really well for island foxes, but after that time, 4 subspecies took a real hit. You can see that even in the best of times, there weren't that many island foxes. This was kind of a high water mark in 1994. We figured we had almost 7,000 island foxes among the 6 islands, which, if you think about other vertebrate species, that's not that many. I mean, if you only had 7,000 African elephants, you would worry, or 7,000 rhinoceros. But for island foxes, they've probably always existed at somewhat small population sizes. But by 1999 and 2000, we had serious declines of over 95% on some of these islands, where we came close to extinction on Miguel and Rosa, went down to less than 100 animals on Santa Cruz and Catalina Island. And it always takes a while for the wheels of bureaucracy to turn. And it wasn't until 2004 that those 4 island fox subspecies were listed as endangered by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The way we detected the decline, it was thanks to the monitoring that we established in 1992. Island foxes were a very logical thing to monitor. We knew they were a fairly rare canid. They were very unique. They were special. They don't occur anywhere else. We knew they were probably pretty vulnerable. They existed at small population sizes, which just by random chance alone, they can blink out. But also we knew that they were probably vulnerable to canine diseases. We thought that was a big threat. And so we started monitoring them on San Miguel Island using these large grids that we trapped for 6 days in a row every summer. And we would mark the animals with this PIT tag, passive integrated transponder tag, which is about as big as a grain of rice. We put it under the shoulder blades where it stays underneath that skin for life. And then when we capture the animal in subsequent years, we read it with a PIT tag reader, and that returns this unique number. And using these mark recapture techniques, we were able to calculate the density, how many foxes we had per unit area, which is foxes per square kilometer. And in 93 and 94, we had pretty high densities out there. In fact, you know, the 15 foxes per kilometer squared was the highest density ever recorded for island foxes at that point. But after that point in time, we saw a decline, a steady decline that never reversed. You know, for the first year, we thought maybe this was some kind of natural population fluctuation going on. But by the second and third years of the decline, we knew that we had a problem. And when we calculated the number of foxes that we had island-wide, we saw that, you know, by 1996 we had 100 animals on the island, and it declined after that. This type of population monitoring was going on other islands that had island foxes as well, which was kind of a remarkable thing in itself, and that was thanks to work done by Gary Romer of UCLA at that time on Santa Cruz Island, and by Dave Garceland of the Institute for Wildlife Studies, who was monitoring foxes on other islands. So we had a database that we could compare, and we knew that the population declines that we were seeing on San Miguel and Santa Cruz were not happening on some of the other islands. But we didn't know why, at least on San Miguel and on Santa Cruz, until we put radio collars on these foxes. We had no idea that golden eagles were out there in the environment eating island foxes at that point. But as soon as we put radio collars on these guys, within 4 months, I believe, half of our radio collared animals had been eaten by golden eagles on San Miguel Island, which was a real surprise to us because we had not observed any golden eagles in the environment out there when we were doing the monitoring. It turns out golden eagles are very stealthy birds, and you actually don't see them that much, even when they're on the islands. We thought maybe we had a disease outbreak going on. But again, Gary Romer came up with this idea that the golden eagles that were apparently on the islands were being supported by the feral pigs in a case of what he called hyperpredation. And the way this works is an alien prey species, feral pigs, exists and allows a new predator to come in and make a living in an area. And while they do that, they eat other native species as well. And that is exactly what was going on the Channel Islands. This was confirmed in 1999 when biologists from the Santa Cruz Predatory Bird Research Group found a golden eagle nest at Cochi Point on Santa Cruz Island. They excavated it and looked to see what prey remains were in there. And they found the prey remains not only of island foxes, but also of feral pigs, the piglets from feral pigs, confirming both of those facts for us. And it just points out how delicate a balance we have in island ecosystems. Island ecosystems don't have as many elements in them as mainland do. If you look at the complement of species that are on the mainland, there's a ton more that are actually on the islands. And that's because of the random nature or the crapshoot that is colonization of islands by vertebrate species. You know, we don't have any of these large carnivores. Very few raptors, even birds, very few birds actually make it out there compared to the number of birds on the mainland. And of course, large ungulates are totally absent naturally from the islands. And so if you look at the changes that were brought about on the islands because of the presence of humans over the past 150 years, you have the addition of pigs and mule deer to Santa Cruz and Santa Rosa Island respectively. And then you have the addition of the golden eagle, which had never been known from the Channel Islands until the 1990s, and also the absence of the bald eagle, which disappeared from the northern Channel Islands and the rest of the Channel Islands by 1960 due to both human persecution early in the 20th century and also the effects of DDT in the system. And that's a fairly well-known story by now as well. Now, these foxes were especially vulnerable to the appearance of this new predator for several reasons, one of which is they're not nearly as nocturnal as carnivores on the mainland. And in fact, if you go out there, you can see foxes during the day. You see them at dusk and dawn, which you generally don't see mainland carnivores doing. They're also small. They're within the prey size range of golden eagles. Golden eagles make a living on the mainland off of ground squirrels and jackrabbits. And the 4 to 5 pound size range of island foxes fits perfectly into what a golden eagle can take. And the last thing that made them vulnerable was the conversion of native habitat to alien grasses. And you don't realize this. You go out to San Miguel right now and you do see beautiful fields of grasses, but those aren't natural. They're European annuals that have come in since humans have been on the island, and a lot of the native shrub habitat has actually been converted to this non-native grassland, which doesn't provide nearly the cover from aerial predators that a shrub or a tree community would. So it's almost a perfect storm of factors that allowed island foxes to be that vulnerable to golden eagles. Now, in the south, the one other subspecies that is endangered is the one on Catalina, and that had nothing to do with golden eagles. Golden eagles don't appear on Catalina Island, probably because there's not a good source for them. The mainland adjacent to Catalina is dense Southern California suburbia, and up here we have the Sespe Wilderness and probably a overall recovering golden eagle population that was able to send colonizers out to the islands by the 1990s. But that didn't happen on Catalina. What Catalina has, though, are human population with dogs and cats, and also you can bring pets over to the island. It's pretty unrestricted. And so canine distemper virus actually ripped through that population of island foxes in 2000. And probably the reason they didn't go extinct was this isthmus right here in the Twin Harbors area acted like a filter. And although most of the foxes on the eastern part of the island succumbed to canine distemper virus, the virus did not make it over to this area. And this was the reason that the Institute for Wildlife Studies, in conjunction with the Catalina Conservancy, was able to repopulate Catalina Island eventually, using foxes from here, translocating them, and establishing a breeding program that has been very successful. Here in the north, in 1999, we knew we had to do two things immediately to prevent foxes from sliding into extinction. One of them was to remove the existing golden eagles that we knew we had on the island at the time. And to do this, the raptor biologists from the Santa Cruz Predatory Bird Research Group set what we call our net traps out here. There's actually a trap underneath this. That's a dead pig they used as bait. The bow net that is set is tripped by a biologist from a remote location when the eagle alights on them. But it's very difficult work because golden eagles are very intelligent. If they suspect anything is wrong, they won't hit on the prey. So these biologists had to get up before dawn and get into place. But doing this proved pretty successful. They removed a total of 44 eagles over time since 1999, which was remarkable in that we didn't think we had that many out there. We thought there were maybe 7 or 8 golden eagles responsible for the decline of the island foxes, because each golden eagle can actually take quite a few foxes over a year's time. But the fact that 44 birds were taken off, and most of those were adults, about 10 of them were fledgling golden eagles actually born in island nests, told us that we had a population of maybe 25 to 30 golden eagles here when we started the work in 1999. And no one really knew about this because of the stealthy nature of these birds. But what we had was the bulk of the use by golden eagles was on Santa Cruz Island, where there were at least 5, 6, or 7 territories throughout the island with nests in them. There were 2 on Santa Rosa Island, and it turns out that they had been used for quite some time. Paul Collins from the Santa Barbara Museum and Brian Lotta from the Bird Group did a study where they excavated these nests. And it's kind of like an archaeological dig where you can go down layer by layer, and these birds will use the nest year after year, and the prey remains just build up over time. And in one of these nests on Santa Rosa, they found 7 layers, telling us that when they found this in 2003, that the first golden eagle breeding on Santa Rosa Island was probably in 1997, which makes sense because foxes were still in the wild at that time before we pulled them in, and indeed there were fox bones in that nest. But what's interesting is in each of the 5 nests from Santa Cruz Island that they excavated, they found pig remains. And in each of the layers from Santa Rosa Island, they found mule deer remains, mule deer fawns. And what's going on when you look at prey remains in a golden eagle nest is you're looking at prey that was brought back to the nest during the springtime when there were live birds, live chicks that needed to be fed small portable prey. And that's what comes back to the nest. So it's also an indication that for every layer, that's a successful fledging of golden eagle chicks for that year. So they were quite successful on the Channel Islands in the 1990s. Those biologists captured them in those nets and brought them to the mainland, released them in Northern California. In fact, in the very corner of Northern California, which is as far as they could go without crossing a state line, and legally release them. Because other states did not want the golden eagles. They still basically pointed them in the direction of north and east and said, go. And this worked, amazingly enough. There was only one eagle that really ever made it back towards the Channel Islands, and I think she stopped in the Bay Area, in the East Bay Area, which tells us a couple of things. That habitat for golden eagles on the Channel Islands was pretty marginal because it was hard to make a living here. And when we brought these eagles to good eagle habitat in the Eastern Sierra or in the Bay Area, they stayed there. They did not attempt to come back to the Channel Islands, even though they had bred successfully here. And so that's good. And it also meant that we would be successful eventually in removing this mortality source from the golden eagles. The other thing we knew we had to do, because the populations were so low, was start a captive breeding program. First of all, to protect those few remaining foxes from any mortality sources, but also so that we could form a captive breeding program and build the populations back up over time. Because 15 foxes or 15 of any vertebrate species is just not enough to make it on their own. So we established an island-based captive breeding program for each of the 3 subspecies in the north. We did it on each island. The reason we didn't go to the mainland is because the pathologists that we were working with were afraid that animals that were raised on the mainland and brought back to the island would bring back new parasites that these populations hadn't seen before. And also, there wasn't that much space in mainland zoos. So we did it on island, which meant that we had to overcome a lot of logistical difficulties, getting materials out there, putting them up, developing a proper way to keep island foxes in captivity, which is a challenge because they're very good climbers. They'll climb out of any pen that doesn't have a roof on them. So we used fencing material and basically made these horseshoe-shaped or square-shaped pens about 600 or 700 square feet. We worked with the National Zoo to develop a diet for island foxes based basically on dry dog food supplemented with fruits and vegetables. We developed a den box design to allow them to breed. We worked with geneticists at UCLA to test our island foxes and make sure we weren't pairing animals together who were closely related. And then we also established a pretty rigorous veterinary program for island foxes, since we were now concerned with the individual health of these animals that we had pulled into captivity. And the great thing is that the captive breeding worked. It wasn't quick. The first year on San Miguel, we only had 4 males out of those 15 animals. So we paired those 4 males with 4 females. Only one of those pairs bred that first year. The next year, 2 of those pairs bred. But gradually over time, these populations in captivity increased to our target level of 40, which was the point at which we figured we could start letting foxes back out into the wild. And so by 2003, 2004, we had reached that on San Miguel and Santa Rosa. We reached that quicker on Santa Cruz, where reproduction in captivity and in the wild has always been better. Our first releases on San Miguel were in 2004. We sent 10 foxes out into the wild at that point, and they did what they were supposed to do. They immediately formed pairs, 4 pairs. This is the male and female from one. That's another pair right there. These are the breeding territories of these 4 pairs. And each of those pairs was successful the very next spring, which we did not expect. But they had, those 4 litters produced 9 pups. We put automatic cameras out there to take pictures of these guys near the den so we could count the number of pups they had and to figure out who was having pups, who was successful. So the next year, we released more island foxes, and you can see the number of territories during the breeding season that we had was about double that, and production of pups in the wild was incredible in 2006. We had 32 pups in the wild that year, and this was very surprising to us. We didn't expect foxes in the wild to do that well, but as it turns out, the reproduction in the wild is one of the big reasons that we're going to be successful in island fox recovery. And in fact, the foxes are recovering themselves because of their ability to reproduce rapidly. Now on Santa Rosa, it was pretty much the same story, not quite as successful as San Miguel. We put camera stations out there as well. And in 2006, when we had 32 pups on Miguel, we had 14 in 4 litters on Santa Rosa. So it's a little bit slower there. But if you look at what these 2 recovery actions have done, the eagle removal did what it was supposed to do. We wanted to increase the ability of our foxes to survive out there. And we've done that. What we do is with the radio-collared foxes that we have, we can determine who dies and what they die of. And what we're concerned about is how many foxes live every year, what the percent survival is on an annual basis. And we know that we want 80% of our foxes to survive in order to have an increasing recovered population. And ever since we've released animals on San Miguel, that population has survived at about a 90% level, which is great. On Santa Rosa, it was a different story. When we first released in 2003 and 2004, there were still very few eagles, but those few eagles on the island had enormous influence. And we have gradually increased this survivorship over time, but it's taken until this year, and Kate, this is data that I just worked up a couple days ago that I was real surprised to see. We're at the point where Santa Rosa foxes are now surviving at the same rate as San Miguel foxes. About 90% of our foxes are surviving, which is great. This kind of sets the tone and allows us to move forward with recovery, because we know that if we don't have 80%, we're actually not going to have an increasing population. So this kind of sets the tone for what's going to come next. So the captive breeding was successful. It produced pups. We released foxes to the wild, and now we have these recovering wild populations. And it's to the point where it's pretty significant. If you look at the pups produced in pretty much a short amount of time, just since 1999 and 2000, we've produced over 200 pups in captivity. We've released a little more than that to the wild on all 3 islands. And our annual survival is really good on all 3 islands in the north, to the point where we have these small recovering populations. And on Santa Cruz, the wild reproduction has been incredible the past 2 years. I think there were about 75 pups born in the wild last year, and the same the year before. So under those conditions, these foxes are helping to recover themselves, to the point where we can actually close the captive breeding program on San Miguel Island and on Santa Cruz. And this is because of the high annual survival we have, over 90%. We've hit our target there, and we've sustained it. And the fact that reproductive success is going so well in the wild, where it's 5 times that in captivity. It's to the point where it doesn't make any sense to maintain foxes in captivity anymore when they're doing so well in the wild. And you can take a look at this with what we've produced in the wild on San Miguel the past couple of years compared to what we've produced in captivity. In 2005 and 2006, we produced about the same amount of pups in captivity as in the wild the first year, but only 6 in captivity in 2006, 32 in the wild, and we had no pups in captivity last year for the first time ever on San Miguel. So it's a good thing that things are going so well in the wild. When you look at the pups produced per female, it's only about half a pup per female consistently in captivity, whereas it's 2.5 pups per female. And the reason for this is that in the wild, we're seeing these juvenile females that are just 1 year old. They're establishing territories and they're breeding successfully in their first year. We don't see that in captivity. We don't see juvenile females really producing animals at all. And foxes paired for the first time in the wild are producing. We don't get that generally in captivity either. So captivity has gotten us a long ways. It really saved us from extinction. But things are just so much better in the wild for reasons we don't entirely understand. But anytime you bring an animal in captivity and expect it to act as though it does in nature, it's just not the same. So we're happy to see what's going on in the wild. On Santa Rosa, it's a little bit different story. In captivity, we had 9 pups last year. There are some problems in captivity that we're trying to get a hold of with a reproductive study being implemented by the St. Louis Zoo. Only 9 of those 14 females that we paired became pregnant, and 6 of those 9 females actually lost pups. 5 entire litters did not go all the way to term, and we knew that because we had done ultrasound on all the foxes in March to see who was pregnant and how many pups they had. And we lost 12 of 21 potential pups that way. Well, we're not sure exactly why, but we think that aggression may have something to do with it. We had to separate 4 pairs during the breeding season because of aggression, mainly aggression by the male. One female who was injured due to aggression died later in surgery. On the other hand, we had a male injured by a female that we now call the Terminator because she has injured 3 males. We've paired her with 3 males, and she's injured every one. So we figured she was tough enough to make it out in the wild, so she's out in the wild right now, and she'll do great. But there is this problem with aggression in captivity, and that may be a product of keeping wild animals in a very close space as well. You can imagine, during the breeding season, things get a little rough, but if you're a female in the wild, you have options. You can run away. In a cage, you can't run away. So right now, we're investigating to see whether aggression, maybe due to stress in captivity, is responsible for these loss of pups. And so if you look at the number of pups born in captivity over the past couple of years versus that born in the wild, it's not that great a difference, which makes the decision fairly easy here, too. It makes sense to keep foxes in captivity for a while longer. And until we see that wild reproduction just go nuts and greatly outstrip the reproduction in captivity. So we'll be captive breeding and releasing foxes on Santa Rosa for probably at least 3 or 4 more years. There are 2 other longer-term things that we knew we had to do to make the islands less inviting for golden eagles, one of which involved feral pigs on Santa Cruz Island, which were introduced in the 1850s and had always existed at populations that probably varied from 3,000 to 5,000 pigs, depending on climate and El Nino. But in a joint project between the Park Service and our neighbor on Santa Cruz Island, the Nature Conservancy, over 6,000 pigs were removed, the last one removed in 2006. And now for the first time in 150 years, that island is pig-free, which removes the attractive nuisance that pigs represent to golden eagles. The other thing that we knew was missing from the environment were bald eagles. And it was thought that had bald eagles been on the scene out there, the presence of that large territorial eagle would have kept golden eagles from establishing at least breeding territories out on the island. So there's been a project funded by the Montrose settlements for the past couple of years to reintroduce bald eagles to the Northern Channel Islands. They were reintroduced from hacking towers on the isthmus of Santa Cruz Island, and it's been pretty successful. About 60 young birds were released from 2001 to 2006. They came either from wild nests in Alaska or they were hatched from eggs at the San Francisco Zoo. And right now there are about 30 of these birds on the Northern Channel Islands. Some of them have bred already in 2006 and 2007, which is great to see. So we're well on our way to seeing a recovering bald eagle population on the islands as well. Now, what's going to carry us through is monitoring. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance, and we're going to have to be eternally vigilant about our island fox populations because they remain so vulnerable to various things. So we're going to continue the radio collar monitoring, where we have biologists tracking at least 50 foxes in the wild on each of our islands to make sure that our survival is still at 80 or 90% and above, and to identify mortality sources when those guys do die. We also use these remote cameras to get an idea of reproduction out there. When you think about a recovering population, there's really just two things that go into it. How many of your animals are surviving from year to year, and how well are they reproducing or recruiting animals into the next year's population? And that's what these cameras tell us. We also trap every year to get an idea of how big our population is. There's no substitute for actually getting an animal in the hand and looking at their condition and being able to count them that way. And for example, we just completed our annual trapping on San Miguel, where we now do it on 4 small grids. Each of these green circles is a spot where an island fox was trapped on that grid, and you can see things are pretty dense out here on Cardwell Point. They're not quite as dense up here on Harris Point. But this type of thing is going to tell us how we're doing. And right now we're doing pretty well. We have 100 foxes out there in the wild, and we don't think it's going to take too long to get to a point where we can consider these populations to be recovered. And monitoring is going to tell us that as well. We're learning some other very interesting things. And this goes back to what I was saying about island foxes helping to recover themselves. This is how many pups you have per female at different population levels on San Miguel Island. And out there, when we had 300 to 400 foxes in the environment back in the early 1990s, the number of pups that were born wasn't that many. It was about 1 pup per female. But you can see when we threw foxes back into the environment at very low population sizes for the past couple of years, they've had very high reproduction, 2.5 foxes per female. So it's the ability of island foxes to reproduce well at low densities that really helps us recover foxes that much quicker. Monitoring has also revealed the importance of aggression in wild foxes. We talked about how we think it's a factor in captivity. We know it's a factor in the wild now too. As we put more and more foxes out there, they're not dying from golden eagles or from other diseases, but we're seeing some actually die from injuries due to other foxes. It's a jungle out there. I mean, these guys are small and cute, but during breeding season, it's pretty intense. And so we're getting some foxes dying from this. Also in our yearly trapping, we're seeing more and more animals that just have these aggression-caused injuries, which are typically the ears. They seem to go for the ears. So a lot of the foxes that we handle now have nicked or tattered ears or old ear wounds that are scabbed up. And I just looked at some data, and about 60 to 70% of the foxes we handle have these aggression-caused injuries. And the pups, to a certain extent, they probably get a pass their first year because not as many pups are showing up with injuries because they don't pose a threat to other adult island foxes at that point. So the first 2 years ago, 20% of our fox pups in the wild had these aggression-caused injuries. Last year, 40% did. And we may see an increase in these injuries to pups out there as we get a more dense population. Another thing we're finding out is there are other mortality sources out there that you can only find out by looking at a population. On Catalina Island, which is fairly recovered right now, thanks to that translocation program and the fact that they vaccinate foxes against canine distemper virus and against rabies, as we do in the north. They're discovering these ear tumors in a lot of the foxes out there, which is at a very high rate for a wild population and is nearly always fatal. They're also associated with this otitis, which is a swelling of the inner ear, and that is associated with the presence of ear mites. Ear mites don't exist on all the islands, only on Catalina Island and one other island in the south. But Catalina Island is the only island that has these ear tumors, which are now becoming a significant source of mortality for them. So that's something that pathologists at the University of California are going to be working on for the next couple of years. Now, monitoring, the last thing it's going to tell us is when we have a recovered population. And it's not as simple as you need 200 foxes and then you're recovered. There's a recovery plan being put together by the Fish and Wildlife Service right now. And there's a new way of thinking about recovery goals. This is a graph of, this is the mortality that we have in a population, and this is the number that we have. So at 10% mortality is what we have right now, because it's 90% of our foxes are surviving, so we have 10% of them dying. So we have 10%. These lines are the risk that you want to see of extinction. This is a 10% risk of extinction over 50 years. This is 5. This is less than that. Pretty much conservation biologists pick a value of a 5% risk over 50 years is acceptable. So all combinations of mortality and population that are underneath this 5% isocline will give us a recovering population. So our goal is to get our population somewhere into here. And we're pretty close to it right now. If you look at the 10% mortality that we have on San Miguel, you can figure out what kind of population we need to consider ourselves recovered. And when you go down from that 5% isocline, it's surprisingly low. We're pretty much recovered if we have 150 foxes on San Miguel Island. And we're not that far away from 150 foxes. We're probably 2 to 3 years away from 150 foxes. So we're well on the way to recovery, and monitoring is going to tell us when we get there. The current score is, about 100 foxes on Miguel, less than that on Rosa, but that's increasing as well. And the real success story in the north is Santa Cruz Island, and that's due to the wild reproduction. Because even though eagles stayed on Santa Cruz Island until 2006 and were still a significant source of mortality, the foxes out there in the wild went nuts, and you can see we have well over 300 foxes in the wild right now, and that's from a low of maybe 65 in 2000. So that's been a real success story. And in fact, we've closed down the captive breeding on Santa Cruz as well. And a lot of this effort has been through the efforts of many individuals and agencies. And I'll single out a couple. Our good neighbors, the Nature Conservancy on Santa Cruz Island, are our partner not only in island fox conservation, but also in golden eagle removal of feral pigs. They took the lead on that, and they're also cooperating with the bald eagle introduction. So they're the kind of neighbors you want to have. And there's been a new nonprofit that's been established called the Friends of the Island Fox, which came in as a new nonprofit a couple years ago, and it's been a great focal point for getting donations that go to not only conservation efforts in the field, but to education efforts to get the word out about island foxes, which until 5 or 6 years ago was a very little known species. So it's because of the cooperative nature of island fox recovery that we've been able to do what we've done in the past couple of years. And it's turned out to be a success story because we may be able to recover these foxes very quickly within 3 or 4 or 5 years of them being listed as endangered, which is a pretty good success story when you're talking about an endangered species. So we would like to get them off the endangered species list as soon as we can. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions you might have. I think they'd like us to use the microphone for questions. So thank you for your time tonight. Any questions? There you go.
The diet of the bald eagle, I assume, is largely fish.
Right. They specialize on marine prey, so that they like fish. They like seabirds. They'll also eat pinniped carcasses, compared to the golden eagle, which just eats terrestrial prey, really. So yeah, that's an important point. Thank you for that. Mm-hmm.
I had heard, because I do some work with the zoo also,
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of the captive pups were males, that there was a predominance of males. Is that true?
It's certainly true for the zoo population. They've had almost exclusively males for the few pups that they've had.
But the captive populations on the islands do not that way.
We had a couple years of predominantly male, and we don't know why that was. But when you look at it over time, the sex ratio of pups is equal, which is what you want in a population like this.
And the second question is, I had heard that some DNA analysis had shown that there was really very, very similar DNA on all the populations, and that they were really a bottleneck, but not a bottleneck.
Oh, well, all the populations have gone through bottlenecks. They're still genetically different from one another, but there has been work done, like on the San Miguel subspecies. They went through an incredible bottleneck through this experience and now have much less genetic variability than they did 10 years ago. Now, whether this is important biologically or not, we don't know. It hasn't affected their ability to reproduce, which is where you would expect lack of genetic variability to make its mark. So right now, we're not worried too much about it, but we're aware of it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. How you doing?
Good, thank you.
Sure.
I'd like to know if you could comment about, I've probably been going out to the Channel Islands camping and hiking and so forth since the early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And last August, I took my youngest boy, we went over to Santa Cruz Island. And I guess maybe from a recent release of some captive, some island foxes that were, actually bred in captivity and released, I can get over just the number in the campground right there near Scorpion that come out, just like you said, at dusk and dawn. I mean, they just look like a herd of Hoover vacuum sweepers, kind of just moving through the campground with their noses to the ground. And I'm just saying, I was amazed because, I mean, I've never, seen them. And I have to really say, for a good number of years, I had never seen an island fox as much as I wanted to. Going out to San Miguel and Santa Cruz and so forth, and I just was overwhelmed by this last visit.
Well, it's a good news, bad news thing. The easiest place right now to see island foxes is at the campground at Scorpion. The bad news is they're like campground dogs, that family at least. And that's, there was a male and female that was released and took up residence near the Park Service compound. They've had 2 litters in a row, and their kids are the ones that are hanging out in the campground. It's a family. They're still members of an endangered species, but they don't act much like that at times. I've threatened to issue campers with squirt guns to help aversive conditioning with those guys.
Well, to seal it off, the last day we were there and had taken our dive gear and a lot of other campers, in preparation for loading on the return, the return trip back, one came out just in, mid-afternoon. Yeah. And was rummaging through, the belongings that someone had left out on a picnic table. So, like I said, it's just
they're very bold.
Story.
Yeah, they are. They're jumping on tents in the middle of the night. They're peeing on tents and bags. So, it's.
That didn't happen.
Yeah. Okay.
So, what type of behavior are they supposed to have as parenting skills? Once they boost the kids out,
well,
for them to find their own territory.
Yeah, and I think it's the attractive nuisance thing as well. They've tapped into a good thing there. They do this on other islands too. On San Nicolas Island, with the Navy presence out there, there are foxes that come into the Navy town, walk into the bar. There's pictures of foxes on the pool table in the bar on San Nicolas Island, and it kind of goes back to some of their history. The Chumash, no doubt, domesticated them, and they domesticate very easily. They're not like other wild animals, so they have a disposition towards this. But unfortunately, luckily it's only one family there at Scorpion that's doing this.
What are you looking for? Healthy?
A healthy island fox couple. Produces foxes year after year. Those foxes disperse. They eat. They usually have 2 pups per year, and those kids will disperse and find their own territories.
In the one year?
Yeah. Generally, not too many kids hang around their natal territories. So we're thinking about ways to deal with the Santa Cruz.
I was wondering if that's part of the aggression.
No, I don't think it has anything to do with the aggression. The aggression, I think these guys are predisposed towards aggression because on an island you're always limited for space and resources. So it pays to be very aggressive. So I think that's where the aggressive nature of the fox comes from. While we're here.
Do they bite?
They do bite, as many of us who have worked on island foxes can attest to. We've all been bitten. They still handle more easily than other wild animals, which is why we don't have to knock them down with drugs to handle them. When you get them in a trap, you basically have a gloved fist in and you grab them around the neck and pull them out. But they can twist around and bite you. Yeah, and it's funny, there are differences among the islands in how aggressive they are. Like Santa Cruz Island foxes are very easy to handle compared to Miguel foxes, which are more prone to bite and try to escape. So there's behavioral differences among the islands as well. Oh, you want to do that? Yeah.
Why do you suppose 1994 was such a high watermark for foxes in the islands?
Well, there was a drought in California from about 1988 to maybe 91 or 92. They were coming off of that drought. And we think that these island fox populations have probably fluctuated over time, maybe to some natural diseases or just population swings. And we think we caught it at a high, mainly due to coming off of that drought.
My question has to do with the mobility of the golden eagles. You're getting rid of the breeding pairs. How likely is it for golden eagles to cruise for a short period of time over to, say, Santa Cruz and create some short-term havoc over there?
We think that's what happened because they bred on Santa Cruz, they bred on Santa Rosa. They never bred on Miguel. There's no breeding habitat out there for golden eagles. And yet the fox population on San Miguel was hit hard by predation. So they obviously go among islands and probably did to a large extent. They probably settled down during the breeding season, but between that time, they probably went between islands.
What about now, though, going from the mainland to, say, Santa Cruz?
Right. There's always a possibility that we'll get more recruits from the mainland out here. And that's why we're going to have to monitor for golden eagles probably for a long time and be very aware of that. We seem to have solved most of that problem. There may be one left on Santa Cruz. There were a couple of predation events last year, but for some reason we haven't seen an influx of golden eagles come back out. And I think it helps now that pigs are gone and bald eagles are out there in such a force. 30 feisty young bald eagles is just something to deal with for any bird that comes out that far. Oh, back there.
Just a couple of questions, Tim. The ear mite problem on Catalina, is there any relationship between that and the domesticated dogs that are being brought out to the island by visitors? And secondly, as relates to aggression, was there, before the rapid decline you had in the early 90s, was there the same sort of aggression in the wild population as you now see as they're returning to higher numbers?
I'll answer the second one first. We weren't looking at aggression. We were just monitoring the population once a year. And so we weren't looking for aggression-type injuries. Gary Romer, who was looking during the breeding season, did find aggression-type injuries back in the early 1990s. And that was with very dense populations. He was looking at a population in Santa Cruz that had very defined territories that were upset when golden eagle predation started yanking individuals out of territories. But at that point, I think there was every much the aggression that we see right now. The first question about the ear mites, it's thought that there's a connection between the ear mites in the foxes and the domestic cats actually on Catalina Island, but that has yet to be confirmed. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.